Hi guys, my name is Olga Noel and I make Belgian titles. Let's talk about a more complicated 6-part mold and how to avoid a mistake I made with it. I will also talk about air vents, how to make them, and why we need them in plaster molds. If you came here specifically for air vents part, please follow this timestamp. But at this moment, let's finish up the molds together. And despite the fact that we have a lot of the processes in common, I thought today I'd walk you through the process of making a more than a 2-part mold. I've talked about 2-part molds, narrow ones with a shin and chunky ones with a ribcage before. And now it's a dreaded upper torso. We start with a clay bed, and let me make another reference to my shortest video here yet, where I describe the process of how to make virtually any water-based clay into a nice material for clay beds. Watch it if you haven't already. And in this particular case, I was really cocky. I typically start with planning, especially with molds that are this complicated. And what I found out was that I could do approximately 1 big mold per day or 2 for the dull parts that come in 2s. So here I was for some reason sure I could manage a middle torso part and this upper one as well in 1 day. Crazy. The rib cage, as I mentioned before, is relatively easy to make, but not like that easy. But I was really thinking along the lines of, I know how to make upper torsos in girls. Let me start the same with this boy and we'll figure it out somehow. So we started without planning. And the same way I would do with the girls. So if you're molding your girl torso, you can follow along. But the next day, I returned with some planning, which I will explain a bit later alongside with my typical size mistake I made. Typical for a person whose last plaster mold stage was like 4 years ago, but all in due time. And of course, I'll tell you how to avoid this mistake, just follow along. Meanwhile, we've made a clay bed, a mold box, poured plaster, and this is going to be our base mold part. The part which is most important for a complicated mold like the upper torso. To work out which one is the main part, try thinking of gravity and the biggest flat area you have on the dull part. For me, it was either back part or the back, and I choose to cover his nips first. And the way we're going to proceed and why we need this base part is we're going to pour 5 more mold parts on top of this base. So it first needs to be big and flat, and second it needs to hold the master body part and not let wet plaster get in between the master and the base. Here's where your push of the master part into the mold plus gravity will definitely help. We treat the base part the same way we did in the ribcage video, same socket treatment, same everything at this point. The complicated nature of this particular body part, however, is that it has 4 joint sockets, as opposed to 1 in the ribcage. And each socket needs its own separate mold part, that's already 4 parts, plus 2 planes front and back without sockets, and you have a 6-part mold on your hand. Which is hard, but we'll pull through. Here you see me coming back to this base in some time. The mold part is completely dry and white, and we need to rehydrate it and make it more of a grayish color. Don't work with dry mold parts when you need to have more parts made. Look at how thirsty this mold part is. Look at all the bubbles. Some people say plaster screams when dunked like this. Listen. Remember, your new mold parts are plaster plus water. It's a hydration reaction. The powder changes its state when mixed with water, and the powder absorbs water and forms hard crystals of gypsum. Now, even if you put separation agent, in my case silicone cream, between those parts, like the dry part and the fresh part, you won't be able to keep the dry part 100% coated with the separation agent. There will be some pinholes that will absorb plaster because the part is so dry and it is so thirsty, and it will absorb water, not allowing this chemical reaction to go its full weight. You can put a thick layer to try and make the separation happen, but it will leave the separation, like the space between mold parts when we wash the molds, and it will be the place where seams will fester. So your porcelain become not as seamless as possible, but with a lot of seams. And there is a better way to not do this. Just let your mold, your dry mold part, drink so much it needs no water from the fresh mixes. And it's enough when there is no more bubbles coming from the mold part. Now to the planning. I've already put the graphite lines in the same places as I would for a girl, but the difference in the back region made me a bit confused. I detailed the places where there absolutely should be separate mold parts, which is around the shoulder socket, the back, the other shoulder, and the front, which we already have, so it should lay in the front part like it does on my palm right now, and we make side parts one by one. Next one is the back part, then the bottom plug with the socket imprint, and then the neck socket, which will contain pouring hole and 2 venting channels to prevent air traps in the mold. In theory, it should work. On practice, I'll show you the mistake I made. Although I rewatched the video and the mistake is there technically, I'm not so sure if it's severe or not. But the severity will be revealed only during the porcelain pouring stage. If it's really bad, I'll fix everything by removing all the parts that I haven't made yet on the video. If it's really bad, I'll fix it by remaking everything but the base part. If it's not so severe, I will just go with it and try to fix it on the fly. As you can see, the base mold part is wet, and the registration keys are placed everywhere. Because the entirety of this base part will be accepting other parts and holding them together in place, I had to be extra sure that all the registration keys are first there, and second, they're not crossing those lines that we've drew on the master body part. Now let's plug the bottom socket plug. Here it's sort of necessary for the bottom and not so much for the top, and we'll separate the part of the master, which will be molded, from the rest of the master, which we won't need for this plaster pouring. And here as well is the place where I make this mistake that I was talking about. As you can see, the clay wall goes only to the top of the shoulder socket. The best way here would have been to prolong it to the top of the base mold. Let me show you schematically. This is how I'm making it on the video, and this is how it should be. Why? Because without this top part, the T-shape for the back part is going to be too big. You'll see what I'm talking about a little bit later. Just now, trust me, this is the mistake, and you'll see where it leads to. For now, we follow along to past Olga. To build the clay separation wall, we need to be extremely precise. And I spent a little extra time to be extra sure that the master doll part is snug in its base mold part, not wiggling, has no space between the mold crevice and the doll part itself. It's really there. Then we don't need a full mold box, just 2 cardboard walls, and I added the third for stability. The thing with the cardboard is, I almost ran out of it, despite me hoarding all the delivery boxes and harvesting all the good cardboard. So my advice here is be even more of a squirrel when it comes to the supplementary materials like cardboard or clay. I understand that it really floods your workspace with extra things, but oh my god, you never know when you need it really badly. And here I forgot to put the separation agent. It's a pain. The space is too narrow and I struggle and I feel sad and try to double down. But I soon realized that I have to disassemble the mold box, put silicone cream first, and reassemble it back and insulate it. Did it pain me? Absolutely. I sometimes think of just buying a whiteboard and writing steps of the current process there to just think less and forget less. But I'm glad I at least remembered this time. Despite the base mold part being fully saturated with water, it won't let go of the second part of the mold that easily. There will be consequences, and the likelihood of you throwing both out and starting from scratch are astronomical, and there is also a threat of you breaking the master part, which is extremely bad. So don't forget this step. Now let's pour our plaster mixture in. I go in slowly here as there are a lot of crevices and a lot of narrow parts where bubbles might get trapped, so I go over the surface of the master with a brush. Don't brush too hard on the solid mold surface though, as you can damage the separation agent layer, but the lightest touch should be fine. Now I filmed how I let it dry. It's X17 or something, and we can disassemble it. Surprisingly, I found out from this footage that I have a bruise on my arm from Poe, apparently. Now you know about it too. And see, almost no leakage, which is great by the way. The process after this is the same as for previous molds. I check the depth of the form, whether I have 2 cm margin on both sides or not. It appears that I do, and now I have to spend time on refining this part so it's straight and guarantees a no seam appearance for porcelain. Pulling the molds apart and then the mold and the master are the most satisfying things ever. Let's check now how they fit together pretty seamlessly, if I say so myself, and the cutting and the sanding stage begins. Please be extremely careful with the knife. As usual, it's the most dangerous part. And don't use any rusty knives, as they can leave microspecks of rust on the mold, which then will be transferred onto your porcelain, and then you'll be left with a black speck porcelain doll part and not knowing what caused it. If down the line, after you poured your porcelain, you open your mold to a speck on the surface that shows a rusted spikes around or rusted halo, don't be shy. Take your pointy knife and dig the speck out. Ideally, just remold the part, but I'm really lazy about it. And unless it's on a seam area, or I found out that the place where 2 mold parts meet is called mold mating area. Sounds a bit dirty, but oh well. So if it's there, both parts will be infected. And the only way is to redo things. Or you can dig it out as well, but unfortunately, this will affect the no seams there appearance. But if it's on the mold surface, just dig it out and fix the weird blob on your porcelain later, because it's definitely better than to have a lot of specks on your porcelain. After a good 20 minutes of wet sanding, I'm glad to start the second shoulder joint. The process is much the same, so let me speed it up. We plug the ribcage socket, we build a clay wall, put separation agent, build a mold box, and pour plaster mixture in, making sure no bubbles get trapped. I say things fast and do it with a speed up on screen, but it takes around 2 hours per mold part from start to finish. Don't rush. Pay extreme amounts of attention to what you do and how you do it. Maybe I'm not the best person to rely on in this case because I struggle with tasks mentally a lot, but the extreme amount of attention towards this part will save you a lot of time during the raw porcelain stage. Now let's slow it back down. We're going into the T-shaped back mold part. Here it's important to somehow hold the side parts flush to the base mold and the master as well. It's quite hard. You can put rubber bands around them, which will create a little bit of a gap and the space for plaster leakage, or you can put a lot of clay to hold them together. This is also the reason people usually make 2 base parts first, the ones without joints, and then pour jointed parts in. It's definitely an option and maybe an easier one, but I do it this way and I try to control everything by just pushing it in. I also like to control the depth, and this is the only way I feel like I can. The steps are again the same. Let's breeze through them. Plug in the sockets on top and the bottom. Be careful with the step between the master and the clay plug. Add a lot of separation agent on every single mold side exposed to the new plaster mix. Make the mold box as usual, all 4 sides, and insulate it the best you can. Mix a lot of plaster. This is one of the bigger mold parts, so it's gonna take a lot, and over pour it so that we could even out the back of the mold for comfortable storage. The thing is, I was so happy and so blinded by the closeness of the finish line. Even as I was cutting the excess of the fresh plaster, as I was opening the mold, demolding the master, taking out the plugs and cleaning the plug lines on a just molded piece, I wasn't expecting the locks. I have put them there myself, I know that, but why are they there? Well, why indeed? This is the way you want to take out those socket mold sides. Schematically again. Clean and easy. And this is what I got. Here are the locks. I will just cut away the nubs on this T-shaped part, and in this case they won't interfere with the taking out the socket mold sides, and this will help. But this is the reason you don't mold things late at night and think before doing. Now to the plugs. You can see that I don't have a registration key on the T-shaped mold part. I did it intentionally so that it would be easier to take this plug out. A lot of separation agent as usual, overpouring, cutting the excess off. And here you see how I tie the mold up with a ton of rubber bands. You need to hold all the parts extremely close to each other. They need to form almost one big funnel for the plug to perform best and for the mold to be airtight later on after you take the master out. Taking them off the mold is a bit problematic, but some instruments help, or you can just cut them. Sometimes it's easier than risking them snapping, hurting you, hurting your face. So if you feel like cutting them, go right ahead. Now here's the place where the registration key might have chipped away, but remember, there isn't one on this side, and the plug pops right off. Usually I take the plug out to check whether it's chipped or not, or whether it needs some extra attention from me, or whether I need to redo it, for example. In this case, I never took my master off of this socket plug, leaving it sort of glued, because all the mold parts around it are already perfect and I see with my naked eye that it's not chipped, so I won't be messing with it. Now I just wipe dirt off of the master and pop it back in for the top plug making. This plug will be made with a pouring hole and a couple of vents, which is a bit tricky. For girls, I usually don't use plug here. The neck becomes a pouring hole and I just form the neck socket on a raw porcelain stage after I take the part out of the mold. But boy's neck is much bigger, as it should be, and I will regret not making it. So let's do it. Again with the rubber bands, pull them tight, and for such big molds, use at least 5 of them. Now let's go for the vents. I use my trusted Japanese wood carving knife to make little grooves where 2 bamboo sticks are going to sit and block the air vent passages. Why do we need vents in this? Because the neck socket is really deep, and when I make this plug, the plug itself ends up in a bowl shape because we need to form a ball joint, or rather a ball socket there, so that the neck joint could sit there comfortably. And the sides of the socket are understandably higher than the bottom of the socket. So imagine the mold is relatively airtight. I'm pouring porcelain from the bottom of the joint. The mold fills up to this bottom and the air gets trapped at every point which is higher than the bottom of the socket. So it stays as a bubble at the top and along the high side walls. If the air can't escape, the slip can't climb into those areas properly. You can shake the mold, of course, and try to get those bubbles out, but then you run a risk of getting bubbles in the porcelain walls that will burst during firing, and air escape is still not guaranteed. You will get a thin spot or even a little empty pocket after you open the mold, and some of you already had this experience, this is why. And the solution to not do this, to not get in this trouble, is fairly easy. Think about it beforehand, look at where your pouring hole is going to be, and 1, 2 or more air vents at the highest parts of your master to give the air a way to escape from an otherwise airtight mold, and the slip will fill in, the air will get out, everything's gonna be golden. Next steps are fairly simple. You saw me already put the grooves in, now I'm adding the separation agent, and we go into blocking all the channels that we need for this socket plug. Add a tube of plasticine that will block the place where the pouring hole will be. Situate the bamboo sticks that you previously coated with a thin layer of separation agent on top of the master, and make sure they fit snug in those grooves you made for them. And then fix them there with some plasticine. A reminder, I use Jovi, you can do too. Then pour your plaster. Before over pouring this time, I also wiggled a brush in there that I dipped in plaster beforehand. This is important because otherwise you're depositing bubbles trapped in the bristles instead of getting them out. And then I finished it off with over pouring as usual. Here it's very important to wait for at least 15 to 20 minutes. Waiting for longer at this period gives plaster time to harden completely because the integrity of this particular plug depends on it. You have 3 channels there that you need preserving, and the whole plug needs to be as sturdy as possible for it. Also down the line, when you pour porcelain in, when the whole mold is dry, this plug is going to take a lot of time to do so. So make sure you dry the plug completely before pouring a new body part in. Those 3 channels make this plug extremely brittle. So if you oversaturate it with water, then bang it by accident, it's going to just break. And you'll have to go through a lot of steps once again. so better give it time. I have also enlarged the pouring hole, and I did it based solely on my previous experience with plaster molds. I need it probably as wide as my finger for those bigger body parts, because otherwise the stream of porcelain is not going to make it there comfortably. Again, it prevents airlocks, and hopefully everything is going to be fine with a socket plug. And here you have it, complete mold with 6 pieces, a pouring hole and a socket plug, and 2 air vents. A very complicated piece I was very intimidated by when I just started out. I hope you have enjoyed watching me struggle, make mistakes, and finding a way around them. If you did, click a like button, subscribe to the channel, ask me questions in the comments if you have any, and please support me on Patreon. Warmest hugs to those who already do. You are the best guys. Thank you for watching. Bye!